I'm here today with Cindy Maddox. Cindy has a new book about to be released called In the Neighborhood of Normal. Cindy left behind her editing business to go back to school for a Master of Divinity degree and now works as a minister in the most liberal mainline Christian denomination. Writing sermons every week has owned her ability to communicate stories with passion, and she even gets to slip in a little slam poetry every once in a while. Cindy lives with her wife, their two children, and a dog named Dobie who loves socks. Don't they all? So, Cindy, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So before we talk about your book, maybe you can give us a little bit more about your background than what I briefly touched on.
Okay. I was raised conservative evangelical, preacher's home, and as an adult ended up leaving that style of Christianity and thought I had to leave God entirely at that point. Ended up finding my way back to the United Church of Christ, which is where I serve as a minister. And in my spare time, I write. I obviously write as part of my work, but I love the power of story. And so I like playing around with words. So that's the slam poetry and the fiction. And so mostly after my kids are in bed, I write. And I wrote In the Neighborhood of Normal over a couple of years. It took me a embarrassingly long amount of time to write the book, but thoroughly enjoyed following those characters around. And my family mentioned have a wife and two kids, 9 and 19, and we are just getting ready to do a cross-country move. So lots going on in our lives.
Yes, that's very exciting. Well, I wish you the best in Minnesota where you're headed. So that'll be wonderful. So the new book, In the Neighborhood of Normal, releases September 1st. How did the book come about?
I always dread the question of where did you get the ideas, because I don't actually know. But how it came about was I was thinking about my grandmother, whose name was Mish, and she lived in West Virginia. She was a very simple soul. Very much a product of her time and geography, which is a polite way of saying she was racist. But she was, I didn't know that as a child, and I just knew her as quirky and fun and a little bit batty. And I got to imagining how she would view our world today. And I started imagining her with a cell phone and thought how totally flummoxed she would be by modern technology. And that just jump-started an idea of an old woman getting her first smartphone. And I did borrow the name of my grandmother. The main character is Mish, and she is 82 years old, and she lives in West Virginia. And there are a couple of other little features that are my grandmother's, like a fish fountain in her house that she thinks is classy and isn't, and a few other fun things like that. But mostly the Mish in my book is a different character than the Mish that was my grandmother. And that's how it all kind of started.
Wow, that's unique. It's so interesting to hear everyone's story of how they come up with a book idea or how they get published or what have you, because they're all such unique stories. So in the book, you deal with some pretty difficult topics, things like domestic violence and teen pregnancy. What led you to talk about those kinds of things?
I think primarily, first where I started was what I like to read, because I like to read books that have some substance, that aren't fluff, but I also need sometimes escapism. What I do for a living carries a lot of pain. And so I don't always want to pick up a book that also carries a lot of pain. And I like having something that helps me escape that world for a little while. But I don't like fluff. I like books that still have some substance and some meaning and deal with some important things. And that's where I started from, was what do I like to read? But I also feel like there are so many difficult subjects that we don't often see treated from a progressive Christian standpoint. A lot of the mic has belonged to the more evangelical or fundamentalist world. And I think it's important for progressive people of faith to have a voice in these huge contemporary issues of our time. And so I have a progressive minister as one of the supporting actors, who is a gay congregational minister, and he allows me a way to present some difficult subjects from a progressive Christian standpoint. Mish does, of course, as well, because she is a member of that church. But that was part of my impetus was, how do we get a broader audience than just who I preach to on Sunday mornings? And how do we reach out to folks to say, hey, there is a different side of Christianity that isn't in the sitcoms and often isn't in the books? So those are kind of my two reasons, is that it's the kind of book I like to read, and I want to be part of getting that voice out there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that there's not enough progressive Christianity literature or attention or everything else, and so I too am working to solve that problem.
You're doing a great job.
Oh, well, I do my little thing, but in any event, so you're a pastor, a full-time pastor and a parent. And so how did you get the book done?
Mostly after 10 o'clock at night, as most of my writing. Fortunately, I'm a night owl. But when I was in the throes of the writing, usually 10 to midnight were my hours to write. I also, when November, I couldn't do the whole NaNoWriMo thing where you're supposed to write, I don't know how many thousand pages during the month. But I did dedicate myself to writing every day, which I usually am not able to do. And so for that November, I did write every day. And then I took a couple of days, retreat days, when I was at a point where I just needed to get in and get to the next stage. But most of it was written late at night after the kids were in bed.
Well, good for you for keeping up that discipline to make that happen.
Like I said, it took a while.
Well, I think that's true for, anyone. Most authors I talk to, developing a book is a multi-year process.
Definitely was for me.
So who do you think the primary audience is that you intend for this?
I did not intentionally write it for a religious market. But spirituality can't help but weave itself in there, because that's who I am as a person. And so obviously that comes through in the writing as well. And I wanted to make sure that it was appealing to a broad audience. And so most of my beta readers, the people who read the book before it is sent out to publishers or agents, were not religious folks, because I wanted to make sure that it was accessible by everybody and not just that I was preaching to the choir, as they say. So I think it has a broad appeal. It would classify as, quote, women's fiction, which is, I hate to use that term because it suggests women aren't interested in sci-fi and, crime and different genres. But it is that kind of focus of issues that are of importance to women, and where women are the main characters, and where it passes the Bechdel test, where the women talk about more things than the men. So I think it does have a broad appeal, particularly of women readers. But I think it also is appealing to progressive Christians who, as I said, don't often see themselves portrayed in fiction, because most of the fiction we see with people of faith is much more extreme. And so I think people of faith, I think clergy folks will relate to some of the pastoral burnout that Pastor Jeff experiences, and some of the ethical challenges that he faces. So I'm hoping it has broad appeal, as well as kind of the niche progressive Christian market as well.
Good. So what would you say would be the one thing that you would like people to take away from the book?
The key phrase in the book is follow the love. When it starts with Mish getting her first smartphone, and she gets a text message with someone inviting her to the diner to have breakfast. And she doesn't know who it's from, because she just got the phone and she hasn't given her number to anybody. In fact, she can't even remember her number. But she shows up for breakfast because it's a mystery, and her life has been long in years but short in mystery. So she goes to the diner and she meets a woman who she comes to believe is Jesus. And partly because she forgot her hearing aids, and partly because she's a widow and she has nothing meaningful in her life to do, and she still wants something important to do with her life. And so she kind of grabs onto this. And this woman tells her to follow the love. And so she continues to get text messages from people she doesn't know. And she thinks that God is sending her on missions to help people through her phone. And she keeps that phrase, follow the love, and follow the love wherever it leads. And it leads her into great adventures, and ultimately it risks her life. But to her, it's all worth it because she's following the love. And I think that would be to a very simplification of the message of my novel is that phrase, is follow where love leads. And that's not always safe, and it's not always pretty, but it is almost always worthwhile.
Well, it sounds very entertaining. So I'm sure this is going to make a great read for folks.
Thank you.
So where can people find out about the book?
It is available from the publisher. Regal House Publishing is my publishing company. And there's a link there. You can order it directly there on Regal House website. You can also order it from your independent bookstore. All independent bookstores will have access to it through their resources. And of course, you can't always get it from Amazon, and a Kindle version is available there as well.
And do you have your own website?
I do, but it's not very active.
Okay, well, we'll ask people to go to those other places then.
All right, excellent.
Well, Cindy, congratulations on the new book. Thanks so much for sharing it with us, and I wish you the best. I hope it goes well in terms of all the launch activities.
Well, thank you so much. I do not recommend holding a book launch while you're in the middle of a cross-country move, but I do appreciate your... They do. 2 years ago when I signed the book contract, I had no idea I'd be moving. So, but thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure.